When I get together with my friends and we stand around a table and we play Star Wars Legion or Blood and Plunder or any miniatures game, really, we always bring new minis to show off. If we've just gotten the new unit for a game and we've just painted it up, it's probably going to be in our army because, we want to show it off, we want to try it out, and so on. And we always talk about, wow, that looks really cool. How did you get that effect? How did you paint that? What color is that? What primer did you use? What varnish is that? And the thing that strikes me is that I use the most Citadel paints out of all my friends. Now, I just want to be clear that this is not an ad for Citadel paints. This is just a video explaining why I use so many Citadel paints. Because I think it is true that Citadel paints are very ubiquitous. If you go to your local game store, chances are you will find Citadel paints. Just as there's a really good chance that you'll find Warhammer 40k, or Age of Sigmar, or Blood Bowl, or Necromunda, or any of the other Games Workshop games that, have a decent following. And that's honestly why I use so many Citadel paints. The main reason is it's what my local game store carries. When I'm in the middle of a project or about to start a project and I need a paint, I don't want to have to go online and order, a paint and then it'll be here in, a week. And by that point, it's like the project has been sitting on my desk, not finished for a week, and I haven't been able to work on it. So I just run down to my local game store and I pick up the Citadel paint that I need and I buy it. And then I'm good to go. Now, it is true, I do use other paints, namely Vallejo. I love Vallejo's grays. I've been trying to get my hands on Vallejo's metallics, but, it's COVID, so they're out of stock everywhere. And, there are other paint companies that I like their paints. But for what I tend to do, I just want something like now. I want to be able to walk into my local game store, grab the paint that I need, walk out the door, come home, and put paint to brush and brush to model. But since we're on the subject, let's go into a couple reasons why maybe using so many Citadel paints isn't such a bad thing. One thing that I think gets overlooked a lot with Citadel paints is on Games Workshop's website, for each of their products, both their models and their paints, if you scroll down, you will see a list of all these different colors and effects, all of these different kinds of reds and purples and greens with all the highlights and stuff. And it will, if you click on that, it'll tell you what they did for, sometimes what they did for a primer, but usually it'll say like what they did for a base coat, what did they do for a wash, what did they do for a highlight. And that is really, really useful because even if you're not painting a Games Workshop product, if you go onto their website and you see the effect that you want, you can just click on it and see exactly how to do it. It's right there. And if you want to paint something the way that the box art shows for a Games Workshop product, because chances are, if you're a miniature gamer, you have at least one Games Workshop kit lying around because you kit bashed from it, or you picked up a starter set and split it with your friend or something. If you want to paint that according to the box art, it's really easy to use Citadel paints to get that. The other thing that I really like Citadel paints for is dry brushing. I'm a big fan of dry brushing. For things like little models, dry brushing, in my opinion, is way better than edge highlighting because you can really just get a really wonderful effect for very little effort and very little time investment. Citadel paints are generally much more viscous. They're thicker, which really does make them nice for dry brushing. Now, they do make a whole line of dry paints. But honestly, even if it's not a base paint, even if it's a layer paint, which is generally a little bit more fluid, I tend to find that these are actually really good for dry brushing. Now, of course, when you're painting normally, these Citadel paints, you do have to thin down a pretty fair amount, more in my experience than Vallejo paints. But if you're willing to just have a wet palette, it works out pretty well. The last thing I'm going to talk about with Citadel paints is actually the Citadel painting method. This idea that you have a base paint and a wash and a layer paint and so on. Because personally, I like this. I like the idea that I base coat and then I can do a wash and then I have layer paints that are much more transparent than the base paints that I can just put over and have a much kind of richer paint job than if I had to, say, mix paints. Now, it is true that you can take things like Vallejo paints and you can just, paint what you want. But for my personal preference, I do like Citadel's system. The downside to that is Citadel paints are sometimes tricky to use as a result. If you see a color that you really want and it's a layer paint, you're going to have to then buy the base paint that corresponds to it to base it and then put that color over. And it may not turn out to be exactly the color that you want because those layer paints aren't designed for full opaque coverage. They're not designed for that. That's what the base paints are for. And that is honestly kind of frustrating at times. But in general, if you're okay with taking the time to do the base and then do the wash and then do the layer and then do the highlight, you get really nice effects with it. And true, sometimes it doesn't turn out super great. Some Citadel paints are better than others. That's the same with every paint line. Some paints just end up being better than others. But if you're willing to take the time to learn the system, you can get really, really nice effects. Honestly, it's not that hard to learn. There's a whole series of videos on Warhammer's YouTube channel where they show you how to paint certain armor schemes and using certain paints together and how to use the Citadel paint system, how to use layers, how to use washes. Like they give you this whole tutorial system about using their paints, which is actually really nice because it gives you kind of a really quick, easy, straight to the point guide to using a system of paints that you can find pretty much anywhere. And that's really it. That's why I end up using so many Citadel paints. Again, I'm not saying Citadel paints are better than any other paint. They're no better or worse than really any other kind of paints. Although I have found some paints that I try them and I'm just not about it. It just doesn't work for me. I'm not happy with it. And I'm sure that there are some paints out there that are way better than Citadel paints in some people's opinions. I just wanted to make this video to explain why I use so many Citadel paints and why, if you use a lot of Citadel paints, you shouldn't feel bad if someone calls you a Citadel poster boy. Because we all know that that's happened to you, don't we? Do you like Citadel paints? Do you hate Citadel paints? Do you agree with what I've said? Do you disagree? Do you think that what I've said is the worst thing that you could possibly imagine? If you think any of these things, or if you think something else, let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please hit that thumbs up button and consider subscribing and hitting that bell icon to get notifications for when a new video goes live. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.